Hello, welcome back. And today I'm going to look at the next render mode. So we've done interactive server. The next one is interactive WebAssembly. So with interactive WebAssembly, this is where we are going to start using client-side rendering. And that means that the rendering will happen in the browser. So this article here, or this page here, goes over the hosting models. We've been doing Blazor server. Now we're moving on to WebAssembly, where really all the code runs in the client in the browser. And the way it does that is with WebAssembly. So we're going to be able to write our front-end code with C#, not JavaScript. So what happens is our C# code gets compiled to DLLs that are designed to run in a WebAssembly environment. Of course, Blazor does that all for us in the background. And so with this hosting model, we take advantage of it when we use the interactive WebAssembly rendering mode. Now, if we look at our project, I added this entities library file to put my models, and the reason why these models are not a folder in this to-do app here is this to-do app is the server, and I almost want to rename this a to-do.server. I usually do that, but renaming the folder structure is it's deserving of a whole tutorial on itself. I will probably do one at some point. But for now, just to keep it looking like what everyone else will have, I've left them with their original naming structure. And so here we have this client folder. This client folder is actually the front-end WebAssembly piece to it. And just like the server project, it's got its own builder, or its own. It is also a console application, and you can see there's not a whole lot here in its build project. And the reason for that is, most of the things that we have in the server program.cs have to do with services that really run from the server, and authentication, authorization, which the front end will have, and then serving up files, which the server's not. I mean the client's not going to serve up files. It's going to reach back to the server to get the files, and also most of these things are dealing with actually hosting the application in its entirety, which the server does. So that's why you see this pretty sparse. There's not a lot that we need to put in here necessarily. But the next thing that comes up is the client. When we're with my demo here, I was basically mocking up the data piece right in the constructor here. So it's useful to flesh out this how we're mocking out how it's getting data by adding some actual services. So generally, down here we have our data folder and our migrations. I'm going to add a folder, and I'm going to call it now repos would be one way of naming this. There's a lot of language which people are pretty specific on. I'm trying to find ways of naming these things in as agnostic a way as possible. So I'm just going to call this my data access layer. And because I don't want to write a lot, I'm going to just call it DAL. And in my data access layer are going to be what would be repos and things like that, or data services. And so in this case, I'm going to make a data service for to-dos. So I'm going to go in here and add a class. And I'm going to call this to-dos, to-do DAL for to-do data access layer. You might call this a repo. And I'm sure I may be misusing terms because everyone has a specific way of doing this. But I think this makes a nice, or makes sense. So in my data access layer, what I need is I'm going to create a constructor that's going to inject the application DB context, and I'm going to just call it context. I'm going to create a private field up here, private constant the context. Now, sometimes, actually, I'm going to check to see if they're injecting a builder in here for us by default. I think they just inject a let's see, where's the application DB context? There's our connection string. Add DB context. Yes, they're just injecting a straight up DB context. Sometimes the templates will be bringing in a DB context builder. There's a lot of good reasons for doing that, but I don't want to make this overly complex or get too far things. So I'm going to keep it simple. And we'll just do it this way. So we're bringing in, so this will be our how we access the database. Now, I also need to, well, at this point I'm not going to, actually I don't need the context yet because this is just a mock. So let me do this. We'll just make this be a mock, and then we don't have to mess with this yet. And so then I'll just make I'm going to take that out of here, and I'm going to make a method which would be public get all. Oh, okay. Okay, so I'm going to get all, and okay, well, that's going to be annoying. Let's fix that. We've got a name collision, which is annoying because I named my project here, and it'd be nice to name it to do app, but we will fix it this way. Rename this to do item. I don't need that. Nope, I do. Okay, so now we have this data service that mocks up getting our data. And I think let's change this to asynchronous and bring in this await here to simulate the data. And so this will now be an asynchronous method that it simulates going to a database. We have a database. We could throw all that in, but I want this to be a mock. So once I have this, this page will now go to that mock. So I need to bring this in, and that means that my mock, I need to pull out an interface. So there's my interface, and I'm going to add a folder and move my interface here. Adjust namespaces, yes. And now that brings in this, we've got an interface, and then I'm going to inject this using the up here, I put a mark, yep, right down here. In our program.cs, I'm going to say builder.services. Add transient, and we're going to use our interface and our mock and inject that. Later on, we'll replace this with a more formal definition, and we'll use the mock for testing. So, okay, so we've got that. We've got our services injected, and then in here, I'm going to inject our I2do DAL. After a while, these usings gets kind of tiring. We're going to probably use entities and interfaces quite a bit. So I'm going to take those out of here and go into this imports file. If I put things into this imports file, they will exist throughout all programs. So I'm going to use that, and that will make this a little bit tidier. And now that I have my data access layer, do's equals await DAL dot get all async. And so that'll bring in all my data from my data access layer. And that I even tidied up my get. Now, if you have multiple things to bring in at once, you could put all those in that data access layer and bring in, one big object which has all the starting stuff you need for your page. So, okay, great. Why did we do this? Well, because we're going to find that we're going to need this a little later. So, okay, save that. Save that. Okay, and so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my client, and here in our client pages, I'm going to add a Razor component. I'm just going to call it to-dos WASM page. And I'm going to say, and I'll make this to-do client. And that brings up this. If I go to that directive, there we are. We're actually on the front end of the page. We are actually running. This is actually running as a WebAssembly page. It's running up completely from the client. There's not much here, so it doesn't really mean much yet. So let's do this. Let's put in a button. We'll put in an on-click. Maybe we'll have a string. And we can see now, same thing, right? We don't have an interactivity mode, so there's no response. And so I'm going to change this to interactive WebAssembly. Going to the client one. Oh. I suppose this would make a lot more sense if I actually called the method. So @on click, let's set that equal to our method. Let's try it without the interactivity mode. Nothing happens. Set it to interactive WebAssembly. And it's responded. Now it's interesting because if I think, you know, I was able to click on it, and it took a little while before it became responsive. So that kind of shows you that this button is not active right away. So that is one of the things with the browser. It renders it because of pre-rendering, and then so I refresh, I'm clicking, and then finally it goes. So it's actually not interactive right away. This whole application has to be downloaded in the background and be present for it to work. So let's run it one more time. Oh, looks like something crept in here. Let me fix that. So let's run this one more time. And let's see. And you can see this delay in being responsive is because of the, you know, we have pre-rendering happening, and then and it's not clickable until WASM is loaded. We can, of course, set the attribute, or we can say render mode. So we could turn that off, of course, just like we did with the other one. But notice what happens. It takes a little while, and then it shows up. It's interactive right away, but there's a little delay. So that's not ideal. So what do? is leave it at interactive WebAssembly. This isn't an issue of caching or maintaining the view state from one render to the other. It really is just, in the case of WebAssembly, it's because we don't have the code to run right away. So probably one way of dealing with this is just start off with this disabled. We'll put a variable here called disabled. And so now what happens is this is going to start off disabled, and then we're going to override another lifecycle event called onAfterRender. This onAfterRender event executes when you're for interactive modes after the interactivity is in place. So we can use this to configure it. Now, you might be thinking we could maybe do this. Let's see. Maybe once we hit onAfterRender, then so after everything's rendered, we could then say disabled is equal to false. And let's see what that does. Okay, it's disabled. It's not coming back. Well, very likely this is run and it's changed disabled to false, but it doesn't this is not automatically going to cause this button, this HTML button, to be updated. So there's a method to drive an update, which is we call state has changed. So I'll put that state has changed here and try that. Okay, here we go. All right, it went active. Okay, great, but I can't click on anything. In fact, the whole site is down. Oh my gosh, what happened? Well, what's happening is we just create ourselves an infinite loop. State has changed causes the whole page to re-render, and then onAfterRender calls, and then it calls state of change. So this is now in an infinite loop, and that won't work. So what can we do about that? Well, there's this convenient first render thing here, and then that's going to make it, that's going to be very helpful here. So what we can do is we can say if first render, that's when we'll do this stuff. So I'll move this into the first render part here. And so what happens is the first render occurs. We will set disabled false. We will drive another render, but now it won't do this again. And so we can use that first render and to drive the re-enabling of our states. We go here. You see it change to being active, and now we can click on it. And so this isn't perfect, obviously, but at least the user has information that the button can't be clicked on, and and so it's a much better user experience if you do this. So you can use the onAfterRender along with disabling your controls until the WASM code is to bring this and make this work. So that shows how to use WebAssembly interactive mode. Next time I'll go into auto mode, which can kind of fix some of these things as well. Thank you very much.